Hidden behind layers of concrete, razor wire, and decades of silence, Archambault Institution stands as one of Canada's most historically significant federal prisons. Archambault Institution's origins trace back to 1880, a period when Canada's justice system was still heavily influenced by European penal traditions. At the time, imprisonment was viewed primarily as a means of punishment rather than rehabilitation. The construction of Archambault reflected this mindset, with its imposing stone walls and fortress-like design meant to convey authority, isolation, and absolute control. From its earliest days, the prison stood as a physical symbol of the state's power over those who violated the law. During the late 19th century, federal prisons like Archambault were built to operate in near-total isolation from the outside world. Inmates were often cut off from society, family, and meaningful human interaction. Archambault's early layout emphasized long corridors, heavy iron doors, and narrow cells, reinforcing a sense of permanence and confinement. These design choices were not accidental. They were intended to break resistance and enforce discipline through environment alone. As decades passed, Archambault became a central fixture in Canada's federal correctional network. While newer institutions were constructed across the country, Archambault continued operating, adapting slowly to changing laws and standards. Its survival through political shifts, legal reforms, and societal change makes it a rare example of continuity within Canada's prison history. Few institutions have remained active for so long while maintaining their original purpose. The early inmate population at Archambault consisted largely of individuals convicted of serious federal offenses, many serving long or indeterminate sentences. Life inside the prison was harsh, structured, and unforgiving. Daily routines were rigidly controlled, and punishment for disobedience was severe. This environment reflected a broader national attitude that crime was best addressed through strict discipline and prolonged confinement. By the mid-20th century, attitudes toward incarceration began to shift. Rehabilitation, education, and behavioral reform slowly entered the conversation. Archambault, despite its age, was forced to evolve. New wings were added, internal systems modernized, and operational procedures revised. Yet even with these changes, the institution retained the heavy atmosphere of its origins, shaped by decades of rigid control. The prison's age has also posed unique challenges. Aging infrastructure requires constant maintenance, and adapting 19th-century architecture to modern security technology is a complex task. Surveillance systems, electronic controls, and modern safety measures had to be integrated into structures never designed for them. This blending of old and new has defined Archambault's operational identity. Throughout its long existence, Archambault has served as a silent witness to the evolution of Canadian criminal justice. Policies have changed, laws have been rewritten, and philosophies have shifted, yet the prison has remained. Its continued operation offers a rare window into how the foundations of Canada's correctional system were laid, and how they continue to influence present-day practices. Standing today as one of the oldest federal prisons in the country, Archambault represents more than a detention facility. It embodies a timeline of punishment, control, reform, and resilience, etched into stone walls that have contained generations of inmates and mirrored the changing values of the society outside. Archambault Institution is located in Sainte-Anne-des-Plaines, a quiet town north of Montreal that has become one of the most significant centers for federal incarceration in Canada. The choice of this location was deliberate. During the late 19th century, prisons were often built away from major urban centers, ensuring isolation, reduced escape opportunities, and limited public interaction with inmates. Sainte-Anne-des-Plaines provided the perfect balance, remote enough to enforce separation, yet accessible for federal administration. The surrounding geography played a critical role in shaping the institution's security profile. Flat land, open visibility, and controlled access routes made the area ideal for surveillance and perimeter control. Unlike prisons hidden deep in wilderness, Archambault's location allowed authorities to monitor movement effectively while still maintaining a strong physical and psychological distance from civilian life. Over time, Sainte-Anne-des-Plaines evolved into a major federal corrections hub. Archambault did not remain alone. Nearby institutions such as Cowansville, Sainte-Anne-des-Plaines Minimum, and later maximum security units transformed the region into a dense cluster of correctional facilities. This concentration reinforced the town's identity as a focal point of Canada's federal prison system. The presence of multiple prisons in one area created a controlled correctional ecosystem. Staff, transport units, emergency response teams, and administrative resources could be shared or coordinated efficiently. For high-risk inmates, this location allowed seamless transfers between security levels without long-distance movement, reducing escape risks and logistical complications. Despite its proximity to Montreal, Archambault remains psychologically distant from everyday society. The contrast between suburban life outside the perimeter and the rigid confinement within highlights the invisible boundary between freedom and incarceration. Residents of Sainte-Anne-des-Plaines live alongside these institutions, yet the realities inside remain largely unseen and unheard. The location has also played a role in managing high-profile offenders. Being close to major courts, law enforcement agencies, and federal authorities allows for rapid response during crises, investigations, or inmate transfers. This strategic positioning has made Archambault a preferred site for housing inmates requiring heightened oversight. However, the prison's placement has not been without controversy. Over the years, local communities and advocacy groups have raised concerns about security incidents, escapes, and the long-term impact of hosting multiple high-risk institutions. These debates reflect the ongoing tension between public safety, economic dependency, and social responsibility. Today, Sainte-Anne-des-Plaines stands as more than just a location. It is an integral part of Archambault Institution's identity. The town's geography, history, and proximity to Canada's largest urban centre continue to influence how the prison operates, how inmates are managed, and how the institution fits into the broader federal correctional landscape. Archambault Institution was built during a time when prison architecture was intended to intimidate, dominate, and suppress rather than rehabilitate. The original design reflected 19th-century European penal philosophy, where the physical structure itself acted as a tool of punishment. Thick stone walls, narrow windows, and towering facades were meant to instill fear, both in those confined inside and in the society observing from beyond the walls. The exterior of the prison resembles a military fortress more than a civic building. High perimeter walls reinforced with watchtowers created a visual statement of authority. From a distance, the institution appears closed, impenetrable, and unwelcoming, an intentional message that escape was futile and resistance pointless. This architectural language communicated control without a single word being spoken. Inside, the layout reinforced psychological pressure. Long, echoing corridors stretched between cell blocks, amplifying footsteps and commands. Cells were small, sparsely lit, and designed to limit movement and privacy. Iron bars, heavy doors, and mechanical locks dominated the environment, constantly reminding inmates of their loss of freedom. The architecture worked hand in hand with discipline to enforce compliance. Natural light was deliberately restricted in early designs. Small windows were positioned high on the walls, allowing light without offering a view of the outside world. This separation from nature and normal life intensified feelings of isolation. For many inmates, time inside Archambault felt suspended, with days blending together under artificial lighting and rigid routines. The central surveillance model used in parts of the institution allowed guards to observe inmates without being seen themselves. This design fostered a sense of constant observation, even when no guard was present. The uncertainty of being watched became a powerful psychological control mechanism, reducing overt resistance and reinforcing authority. As the prison aged, modifications were added, but the core architectural philosophy remained intact. New security technologies, cameras, reinforced barriers, and electronic locking systems were integrated into the old stone framework. This blending of historic design and modern control systems created a uniquely oppressive environment, where the weight of history compounds contemporary security measures. The intimidating architecture also shaped staff behavior and institutional culture. Guards operated within a space designed for control and containment, influencing how authority was exercised daily. The physical environment reinforced hierarchy, order, and strict enforcement of rules, shaping interactions between staff and inmates. Even today, Archambault's fortress-like structure stands as a reminder of an era when prisons were designed to break the spirit as much as restrain the body. The architecture continues to define the tone of life inside, silently enforcing discipline through walls, corridors, and locked steel doors that have endured for generations. Throughout its long history, Archambault Institution has been known for housing some of Canada's most high-profile and dangerous federal offenders. Its security capacity, strategic location, and layered control systems made it a preferred facility for inmates whose crimes attracted national attention or posed significant risks. Over time, the prison's name became closely associated with individuals considered too dangerous for standard correctional environments. Many of the inmates transferred to Archambault were serving long or life sentences, often for violent crimes such as murder, organized crime leadership, or repeat serious offenses. These individuals required heightened supervision due to their influence, notoriety, or behavioral history. The institution structure allowed authorities to isolate, monitor, and control inmates whose presence could destabilize lower security facilities. High-profile inmates brought unique challenges. Media attention, public pressure, and political scrutiny often followed their incarceration. Archambault became a controlled environment where such offenders could be managed away from constant public exposure. The prison's strict access policies limited contact with the outside world, reducing opportunities for communication, manipulation, or notoriety-driven behavior. Within the prison population, these inmates often carried reputations that affected internal dynamics. Their presence could influence hierarchies, alliances, and tensions among prisoners. As a result, prison administrators had to carefully manage housing assignments, movement schedules, and interactions to prevent violence or power consolidation inside the walls. Security protocols for high-risk inmates at Archambault were often more restrictive than standard procedures. Enhanced surveillance, limited association, and frequent searches were common. Some inmates spent extended periods under close monitoring, not only for the safety of staff and other prisoners, but also to prevent escape attempts or coordinated disruptions. The institution's experience with dangerous offenders also shaped its operational culture. Staff were trained to deal with manipulative behavior, intimidation tactics, and sudden violence. Over decades, this created a workforce accustomed to constant vigilance, where routine tasks were performed with an awareness of ever-present risk. Archambault's reputation as a place for high-profile criminals further reinforced its standing within the federal correctional system. Transfers to the institution were often seen as a response to serious incidents elsewhere, signaling a shift toward tighter control. For inmates, arrival at Archambault carried psychological weight, marking a new level of restriction and scrutiny. By housing some of the country's most notorious offenders, Archambault Institution became more than just a prison. It became a symbol of the state's capacity to contain extreme criminal behavior. The legacy of these inmates continues to shape how the institution is perceived, operated, and remembered within Canada's correctional history. Archambault Institution operates as a multi-security complex, a structure that sets it apart from many single classification prisons in Canada. Rather than serving only one category of inmate, the institution is designed to manage individuals across maximum, medium, and minimum security levels. This layered system allows correctional authorities to control risk while adapting to changes in inmate behavior, sentence progression, and institutional needs. The maximum security units represent the most restrictive environment within Archambault. These areas house inmates assessed as posing the highest risk due to violence, escape potential, or influence over others. Movement is tightly controlled, association is limited, and daily routines follow strict schedules. Every aspect of life in these units is governed by security protocols designed to minimize unpredictability. Medium security units form the operational core of the institution. Inmates housed here typically have demonstrated some level of behavioral stability, but still require close supervision. These units allow limited interaction, structured work assignments, and controlled programming. The balance between restriction and activity reflects an attempt to maintain order while preparing inmates for gradual progression. Minimum security units, though still part of the same institutional complex, operate under a distinctly different atmosphere. Inmates assigned here are considered lower risk and are often nearing later stages of their sentences. Movement is less restrictive, supervision is reduced, and there is greater emphasis on work programs and personal responsibility. However, the presence of higher security units nearby reinforces constant oversight. One of the key advantages of this multi-level system is internal mobility. Inmates can be transferred between security levels without leaving the broader Archambault complex. This reduces transportation risks, administrative delays, and exposure to external threats. For authorities, it allows rapid response to changes in behavior, whether through promotion or demotion in security status. The coexistence of different security levels also creates operational challenges. Preventing contact between incompatible inmate groups requires precise scheduling and strict enforcement of movement protocols. Even minor miscalculations can escalate into serious incidents. As a result, staff coordination and communication are critical to maintaining stability. From a psychological standpoint, the presence of multiple security levels introduces a powerful incentive structure. Inmates are constantly aware that behavior directly affects their classification. Progression to lower security can mean more freedom, while misconduct can result in immediate regression. This system turns security level itself into a behavioral control mechanism. Over time, the multi-security design has become central to Archambault's identity. It reflects a correctional strategy that prioritizes containment, adaptability, and risk management, allowing one of Canada's oldest prisons to function within a modern federal framework while maintaining strict institutional control. Archambault Institution serves as a living record of how Canada's correctional philosophy has evolved over more than a century. When the prison first opened, incarceration was driven by punishment and deterrence. The goal was not to reform, but to isolate offenders from society and impose strict discipline. Early policies emphasized obedience, silence, and labor, reflecting a belief that hardship would correct criminal behavior. As social attitudes shifted in the early 20th century, questions began to arise about the effectiveness of purely punitive imprisonment. Reform movements pushed for education, moral instruction, and structured routines aimed at behavioral change. Archambault gradually incorporated these ideas, introducing limited work programs and basic educational opportunities, though security and control remained dominant priorities. By the mid-20th century, rehabilitation became an increasingly prominent theme in Canadian corrections. Psychological assessment, counseling, and classification systems were introduced to better understand inmate behavior. At Archambault, this led to more structured evaluations, influencing housing assignments and sentence management. The institution began to adapt from a one-size-fits-all model to a more individualized approach. The late 20th century marked a significant turning point. Human rights considerations, legal oversight, and public accountability reshaped prison operations nationwide. Archambault was required to align with new standards regarding inmate treatment, access to health care, and procedural fairness. These changes often clashed with the prison's historic design, forcing a balance between tradition and reform. Risk management emerged as a central principle in modern corrections. Rather than focusing solely on punishment or rehabilitation, authorities began emphasizing public safety through controlled assessment and supervision. Archambault's multi-security structure fit this approach, allowing inmates to be managed according to risk rather than solely by sentence length or offense type. Despite these reforms, the institution continues to embody tension between old and new philosophies. Harsh architectural features and rigid routines coexist with counseling services and reintegration planning. This contrast highlights the difficulty of transforming a prison built in the 19th century into a modern correctional facility without erasing its original purpose. Staff training and institutional culture also evolved alongside policy changes. Correctional officers are now expected to balance enforcement with communication, observation, and de-escalation. At Archambault, this shift has required adapting long-standing practices to meet contemporary expectations of professionalism and accountability. Today, Archambault Institution reflects the layered nature of Canada's correctional philosophy, where punishment, control, rehabilitation, and public safety intersect. Its continued operation demonstrates how evolving ideas about justice are applied within structures shaped by history, creating an environment where change is constant yet constrained by the past. Archambault Institution has experienced periods of violence and unrest that reflect the inherent tensions of long-term incarceration in a high-security environment. Housing dangerous offenders, managing strict routines, and enforcing rigid authority has, at times, led to explosive confrontations. These incidents are not isolated events, but symptoms of deeper structural and psychological pressures within the prison system. Over the decades, inmate-on-inmate violence has posed a persistent challenge. Confined spaces, enforced proximity, and rigid hierarchies often escalate minor disputes into serious conflicts. At Archambault, such incidents have required swift intervention, lockdowns, and internal investigations to prevent broader destabilization of the institution. Staff have also faced direct threats during periods of unrest. Assaults on correctional officers, while relatively rare, have had lasting impacts on operational procedures. Each incident has prompted tighter security measures, revised training protocols, and reinforced rules governing movement, searches, and supervision. Collective unrest, including protests and coordinated disobedience, has periodically emerged as inmates responded to conditions, policy changes, or disciplinary actions. These moments placed the institution under national scrutiny, raising questions about prison conditions, use of force, and inmate rights. Archambault's age and design often intensified these situations, limiting flexibility in response. Lockdowns became a standard response to serious incidents. During these periods, movement is halted, programs are suspended, and inmates are confined to their cells for extended durations. While effective for restoring control, lockdowns also increase psychological strain, often creating a cycle where tension continues to build beneath the surface. Violence and unrest have also influenced how inmates are classified and housed. High-risk individuals are often isolated or placed under enhanced supervision following incidents. This approach prioritizes safety but can contribute to long-term stress, resentment, and institutional fatigue among both inmates and staff. Each episode of unrest has left lasting operational changes. New surveillance systems, revised emergency protocols, and stricter access controls were often introduced in response to past crises. In this way, violence has directly shaped the institution's modern security framework. The history of unrest at Archambault underscores a fundamental reality of high-security incarceration. control is never permanent. Stability must be continuously enforced, negotiated, and maintained within an environment where pressure, confinement, and authority collide on a daily basis. Archambault Institution has frequently been placed under public and media scrutiny, particularly during moments of crisis or controversy. As one of Canada's oldest and most secure prisons, any incident within its walls tends to attract national attention. Riots, assaults, or policy disputes have often sparked broader conversations about prison conditions and the effectiveness of the correctional system. Media coverage has played a powerful role in shaping public perception of Archambault. News reports focusing on violence, escapes, or high-profile inmates have contributed to an image of the institution as severe and unforgiving. While such coverage highlights real security challenges, it often simplifies complex internal realities, presenting the prison as a symbol rather than a functioning system. Legal challenges and investigations have further intensified scrutiny. Inquiries into use of force, inmate treatment, or administrative decisions have periodically forced the institution to defend its practices. These moments have tested transparency and accountability, especially when historical infrastructure clashes with modern legal expectations. Public advocacy groups and human rights organizations have also directed attention toward Archambault. Concerns over solitary confinement, mental health care, and living conditions have prompted calls for reform. These pressures have compelled authorities to reassess policies, even when security risks complicate rapid change. Political debate often follows high-profile incidents. Lawmakers face pressure to respond, balancing public demand for safety with growing awareness of inmate rights. Archambault has repeatedly become a reference point in these debates, cited as evidence of both the necessity and the limitations of maximum security incarceration. Internally, scrutiny has had a direct impact on operations. Staff are required to document actions meticulously, follow stricter procedures, and undergo additional oversight. While this increases accountability, it also adds layers of administrative pressure to an already demanding environment. The institution's long history magnifies controversy. Practices once considered standard are now re-examined through modern ethical and legal lenses. This creates tension between historical precedent and contemporary expectations, placing Archambault at the crossroads of tradition and reform. Through decades of attention and criticism, Archambault Institution has remained under constant observation, not just by cameras and guards, but by the public itself. This external gaze continues to influence how the prison operates, adapts, and justifies its role within Canada's correctional landscape. Strict surveillance lies at the core of daily life inside Archambault Institution. Every movement, interaction, and routine is shaped by a security system designed to detect risk before it escalates. Cameras monitor corridors, cell blocks, and common areas, creating an environment where observation is constant and unavoidable. This continuous monitoring serves as both a preventive measure and a response mechanism. Layered security means protection does not rely on a single barrier. Physical structures such as reinforced walls, steel gates, and controlled checkpoints are combined with electronic systems and human oversight. Each layer compensates for potential weaknesses in another, ensuring that breaches are difficult to execute and quickly contained. This redundancy is essential in a facility housing high-risk inmates. Access control is central to the institution's design. Movement between zones requires authorization, escort, and precise timing. Doors operate through centralized control systems, allowing staff to isolate sections instantly if an incident occurs. Even routine activities such as meals, recreation, or medical visits are scheduled to prevent unsupervised contact. Surveillance extends beyond technology to human observation. Correctional officers are trained to detect subtle behavioral changes, tensions, or patterns that may indicate unrest. Their presence reinforces authority and provides immediate response capability. In a high-security setting like Archambault, vigilance is not occasional, it is continuous. The layered approach also affects inmate psychology. Knowing that surveillance is omnipresent alters behavior, discouraging overt defiance while fostering internal pressure. This sense of being constantly watched becomes an invisible barrier, shaping conduct without direct intervention. Emergency response is built into the security framework. Alarms, lockdown protocols, and rapid deployment teams are activated the moment a threat is detected. These systems are designed to contain incidents before they spread, preserving overall institutional stability. As technology advanced, Archambault integrated modern surveillance tools into its historic structure. This fusion of old architecture and new systems created a uniquely controlled environment, where centuries-old walls support 21st-century monitoring. Through strict surveillance and layered security, Archambault maintains control over a complex and potentially volatile population. These measures define the institution's daily rhythm, ensuring order while reinforcing the constant balance between safety and restriction. Security at Archambault Institution is reinforced through the constant presence of armed guards, highly regulated inmate movement, and the use of isolation units. These elements form the front line of control, ensuring that authority is visible, immediate, and enforceable at all times. The presence of armed personnel alone sends a clear message: order is non-negotiable. Correctional officers patrol corridors, towers, and perimeters with strict routines. Their training focuses on threat assessment, rapid response, and containment. Armed positions are strategically placed to cover high-risk zones, ensuring that any disturbance can be neutralized quickly. This visible force acts as both deterrence and protection for staff and inmates alike. Movement inside the institution is tightly scheduled and monitored. Inmates are escorted between locations, and transitions occur under supervision. Routes are predetermined, timings are controlled, and unscheduled movement is prohibited. This system minimizes opportunities for conflict, escape attempts, or coordinated actions among inmates. Isolation units represent the most restrictive form of control within Archambault. These units are used to manage inmates who pose immediate threats to safety or institutional order. Placement in isolation limits contact, reduces stimuli, and allows authorities to stabilize volatile situations. While effective for security, isolation carries psychological consequences that require careful oversight. Decisions regarding isolation are governed by formal assessments and review processes. Authorities must balance the need for control with legal and ethical considerations. The use of isolation has therefore become a focal point of debate, reflecting broader discussions about mental health and human rights in corrections. The interaction between armed guards and isolation protocols defines the institution's response to crisis. When routine control fails, these measures provide a last line of defense. Their effectiveness relies on discipline, training, and coordination among staff. Over time, these practices have shaped daily life inside Archambault. Inmates learn to navigate a system where movement is permission-based and authority is ever-present. For staff, constant readiness becomes a professional norm. Armed supervision, controlled movement, and isolation units together form a security framework designed to prevent disorder and maintain dominance. They represent the most visible expression of the institution's commitment to control within a high-risk correctional environment. Despite its reputation for strict control, Archambault Institution incorporates rehabilitation and reintegration programs within its high-security framework. These programs reflect a recognition that long-term public safety depends not only on confinement, but also on addressing the behaviors and conditions that lead to criminal activity. Even within a tightly regulated environment, efforts are made to introduce structure beyond punishment. Educational programs form a foundational component of rehabilitation. Inmates have access to basic literacy, secondary education, and in some cases vocational training. These opportunities are carefully supervised and scheduled, balancing learning with security. For many inmates serving long sentences, education becomes one of the few pathways to personal development within confinement. Work programs are another key element. Assigned labor within the institution helps maintain daily routines and instills a sense of responsibility. Tasks range from maintenance to institutional services, all conducted under supervision. Participation is often linked to behavior assessments, reinforcing discipline while offering limited autonomy. Psychological and behavioral programs play a crucial role, particularly for inmates with histories of violence or substance abuse. Counseling, anger management, and cognitive behavioral interventions are designed to reduce risk factors associated with reoffending. These programs require cooperation and sustained engagement, making them challenging within a high-security context. Reintegration planning begins long before release. Case management teams assess progress, behavior, and participation to determine readiness for reduced security or eventual parole. This gradual process aligns with the institution's multi-level security system, allowing inmates to move toward less restrictive conditions as trust is earned. Cultural and spiritual services also contribute to rehabilitation. Chaplaincy programs and cultural support offer inmates a sense of identity and reflection. These services, though limited by security constraints, provide emotional stability and guidance within a rigid environment. The coexistence of rehabilitation and strict security creates ongoing tension. Programs must operate within controlled spaces, under surveillance, and with limited resources. Any disruption can result in suspension, reinforcing the fragile balance between reform and order. At Archambault, rehabilitation does not replace control, it operates within it. These programs represent an attempt to humanize incarceration while maintaining safety, illustrating how reform-oriented initiatives persist even inside one of Canada's most secure and historic prisons. Mental health assessment plays a central role in how inmates are managed at Archambault Institution. A significant portion of the prison population enters the system with pre-existing psychological conditions, trauma histories, or behavioral disorders. In a high-security environment, untreated mental health issues can escalate quickly into violence, self-harm, or institutional instability. Upon intake and throughout incarceration, inmates undergo psychological evaluations designed to identify risk factors and treatment needs. These assessments inform decisions about housing, security classification, and program eligibility. At Archambault, mental health is not treated as a separate concern. It is directly tied to safety and control. Psychologists and mental health professionals work within strict security limits. Sessions are structured, monitored, and scheduled to reduce risk while maintaining confidentiality where possible. Treatment often focuses on stabilization, impulse control, and coping mechanisms rather than long-term therapy, reflecting the realities of incarceration. Inmates exhibiting acute distress may be placed under enhanced observation. These measures aim to prevent self-harm or violent outbursts, but they also highlight the tension between care and restriction. Managing mental health in a custodial setting requires constant judgment, as protective actions can sometimes intensify psychological strain. Long-term confinement presents additional challenges. Extended sentences, isolation, and limited social contact can worsen anxiety, depression, and paranoia. At Archambault, staff must monitor gradual behavioral changes that signal deteriorating mental health, even when no immediate crisis is visible. Mental health assessments also influence disciplinary responses. Behavioral incidents are not always treated purely as rule violations. Psychological context may shape how authorities respond. This approach reflects a shift toward understanding behavior through both security and clinical perspectives. The institution's age complicates mental health care delivery. Historic layouts limit space for therapeutic environments, forcing services into repurposed areas not designed for treatment. Despite this, mental health support remains a critical component of daily operations. At Archambault Institution, psychological management is woven into the fabric of control. It serves as both a protective mechanism and a risk management tool, shaping decisions that affect safety, security, and the long-term trajectory of inmates within the federal system. Archambault Institution exists at the center of an enduring tension between punishment and reform, a conflict that has defined correctional systems for generations. Originally built as a place of strict confinement, the prison was never intended to rehabilitate. Its walls, routines, and rules were designed to impose consequences, not offer second chances. This legacy continues to influence how the institution operates today. As correctional philosophy evolved, reform-oriented ideals were gradually introduced into a structure rooted in punishment. Programs aimed at education, mental health, and reintegration were layered onto an environment still governed by control and surveillance. This created a fundamental contradiction, efforts to encourage personal change unfolding within a space designed to restrict autonomy. For inmates, this tension is felt daily. Participation in rehabilitative programs is often framed as a pathway to reduced security or parole, yet progress occurs under constant supervision. The pressure to conform can feel less like transformation and more like compliance, raising questions about the authenticity of reform achieved in such conditions. Staff are equally affected by this dual mandate. Correctional officers are tasked with enforcing rules while also supporting rehabilitative goals. Balancing authority with encouragement requires judgment and adaptability, particularly in a high-risk setting where safety concerns can override reform initiatives at any moment. Institutional responses to misconduct further highlight this conflict. Disciplinary measures prioritize order and deterrence, while rehabilitative frameworks emphasize understanding and behavioral change. Determining which approach to apply often depends on context, creating inconsistencies that can frustrate both inmates and staff. Public expectations amplify the tension. Society demands security and punishment for serious crimes, yet also expects prisons to reduce reoffending. Archambault, with its history and profile, becomes a focal point for these competing demands, embodying the challenge of satisfying both. The prison's architecture reinforces this struggle. Heavy doors, surveillance, and isolation units communicate punishment, while classrooms and counseling rooms attempt to signal reform. The coexistence of these spaces underscores the unresolved nature of the institution's mission. At Archambault, punishment and reform do not exist separately. They intersect, conflict, and coexist. This ongoing tension shapes policy, daily operations, and the lived experience of incarceration within one of Canada's most historically significant prisons. Archambault Institution functions as a living record of Canada's prison system, preserving within its walls the layers of policy, practice, and ideology that have shaped federal corrections over more than a century. Unlike newer facilities built to modern specifications, Archambault carries visible evidence of each era it has survived, making it both an operational prison and a historical artifact. The oldest sections of the institution reflect a time when incarceration was synonymous with punishment and isolation. Stonework, narrow cells, and rigid layouts remain intact in parts of the prison, offering a direct link to 19th-century penal philosophy. These spaces serve as reminders of how early systems prioritized authority over rehabilitation. As reforms were introduced, Archambault adapted incrementally rather than being rebuilt. New wings, security upgrades, and program areas were added over decades, creating a patchwork of old and new. This layered construction mirrors the gradual evolution of correctional thinking, where change occurred through modification rather than replacement. Operational policies have similarly evolved. Rules governing discipline, classification, and inmate rights have been rewritten numerous times, each reflecting shifting legal standards and social values. Archambault's continued use under these changing frameworks highlights the adaptability and limitations of long-standing institutions. Staff practices also reveal this historical continuity. Training methods, response protocols, and institutional culture have been influenced by both tradition and reform. Veteran officers pass down experience shaped by past incidents, while newer staff bring modern perspectives shaped by contemporary policy. The prison's history of housing high-profile offenders and managing crises further anchors it in national memory. Each major incident becomes part of an ongoing narrative, contributing to public understanding of how Canada deals with serious crime and incarceration. Unlike museums or archives, Archambault's history is not static. It is reenacted daily through routines, procedures, and interactions that echo past practices while incorporating new ones. This constant motion keeps the institution relevant as a case study in correctional evolution. As a living record, Archambault Institution offers insight into the strengths, contradictions, and unresolved questions of Canada's prison system. Its continued operation ensures that history remains active, shaping present decisions and future reforms within federal corrections. Archambault Institution stands as a powerful symbol of authority, representing the state's ultimate response to serious crime. Its imposing presence, reinforced by high walls and controlled access points, communicates a clear boundary between lawful society and those who have violated its most fundamental rules. This symbolism extends beyond physical confinement, shaping public perception of justice and consequence. Control defines every aspect of life within the institution. From scheduled movement to constant surveillance, the environment is engineered to limit choice and enforce compliance. This structure reinforces the idea that freedom is conditional, withdrawn when laws are broken. For inmates, control is not abstract. It is experienced through daily routines and restrictions. The concept of consequence is embedded in the institution's history. Archambault has housed individuals convicted of crimes that deeply affected communities and national consciousness. Their confinement within such a secure facility serves as a tangible reminder of accountability, reinforcing the seriousness of criminal actions. For staff, the institution symbolizes responsibility and duty. Correctional officers operate as agents of authority, tasked with maintaining order while upholding legal standards. Their role embodies the balance between enforcing consequences and managing human lives within a rigid framework. Public discourse often turns to Archambault as a reference point in debates about crime and punishment. Its reputation amplifies its symbolic value, positioning it as an example of how the state asserts control over extreme behavior. This symbolism influences policy discussions and public expectations alike. The prison's architecture reinforces its symbolic role. Fortress-like design elements communicate permanence and inevitability, suggesting that consequences are enduring. These visual cues extend the institution's influence beyond its walls, shaping societal understanding of justice. Symbolism also affects inmates' identities. Being held at Archambault carries psychological weight, marking a distinct stage in incarceration. The institution becomes part of an individual's narrative, shaping self-perception and future prospects. As a symbol of authority, control, and consequence, Archambault Institution transcends its function as a prison. It reflects society's boundaries, values, and unresolved questions about how justice is enforced within Canada's correctional system.